At the beginning of World War II, America faced a paradox. It had everything: oil, steel, factories, but lacked the most crucial resource of all: time. While German submarines sank convoys across the Atlantic, the US merchant fleet was disappearing faster than it could be rebuilt. In those desperate months, a man stepped forward, someone no one would have expected. He wasn't an admiral. He wasn't an engineer. He wasn't even a sailor. His name was Henry John Kaiser, a builder of roads and dams, a man with a dazzling smile and a reputation for dreaming big. But it was he who would turn the impossible into legend. He was born in 1882 in the small town of Spruce, New York. The son of German immigrants, he knew the value of hard work from childhood. At 13, he sold photographs. At 17, he was trading cement. By 20, he was already leading his own crew of road workers. He had no formal engineering education, but he possessed something many scholars lacked: imagination and audacity. In the 1920s, he built roads through the mountains of Nevada, then dams, airfields, and bridges. People said, "Kaiser is the man who makes the impossible look routine." By 1930, America had plunged into the Great Depression, but Kaiser moved against the current. While others shut down their companies, he created new ones. He invented a way to build concrete roads 3 times faster by using an assembly line system. That idea would later become his greatest weapon. "You don't wait for miracles," he said. "You build them." Henry J. Kaiser, 1936. In 1933, Kaiser joined the construction of the Grand Coulee Dam, one of the largest dams in the world. There, for the first time, he witnessed how thousands of people could work like a single machine, if they had the right organization. "It's not the cement or the steel that matters, it's the rhythm," he told reporters, watching as crews worked in rotating shifts day and night without pause. That sentence would later become the essence of his revolution. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, America suddenly grasped the scale of the disaster. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships at a rate of 500,000 tons per month. Without them, Britain and the Soviet Union would be left without weapons, fuel, or food. President Franklin D. Roosevelt summoned the nation's leading industrialists to find a solution. Among the executives of the great shipbuilding firms sat a man with no tie and no background in naval construction: Henry J. Kaiser. According to witnesses, the exchange was brief. Roosevelt: "Mr. Kaiser, you've never built ships, have you?" Kaiser: "No, sir. But I've built things that didn't exist until people said they couldn't be done." The room erupted in laughter. 3 years later, that laughter would turn to astonishment. Kaiser leased a stretch of coastline in California, Richmond Shipyard, number 1. It was nothing but mud, open land, and a few half-finished docks. 90 days later, cranes were roaring, welding torches blazed, and thousands of workers were assembling the first ship. But Kaiser's true genius was this: he broke the old logic of shipbuilding. In the past, ships were built in place, like buildings, from keel to mast. Kaiser proposed something revolutionary: build them in pieces, like a giant kit, and then assemble the modules. He introduced the concept of modular sections. The bow, stern, deck, and engine room were all constructed separately. Each team worked independently, without getting in each other's way. When the sections were ready, cranes lifted and joined them together like parts of a puzzle. "We don't build ships, we assemble them." Henry J. Kaiser, 1942. For traditional shipbuilders, this sounded like heresy, but time would prove it was the future. Kaiser's shipyards weren't filled with engineers or naval architects. They were filled with ordinary people, housewives, former farmers, students, African Americans, immigrants. He hired everyone others refused to hire. Then he trained them from scratch. He gave them uniforms, hot meals, and medical care, creating what would become America's first private health insurance system. Kaiser Permanente. You give people dignity, and they'll give you miracles. Henry J. Kaiser, 1943. The first Liberty ship rolled off the docks in just 110 days. For any traditional shipyard, that was a miracle, nearly twice as fast as normal. Newspapers shouted the headline, "Kaiser's Madness Works." President Roosevelt personally called him and said, "Henry, you've just changed how America fights." Thus were born the Liberty ships, simple, reliable, standardized cargo vessels. Length, 135 meters. Cargo capacity, 10,000 tons. They carried everything, from tanks to bread. Kaiser used to say, "War is not about strength, it's about production." And in those words, there was truth. He proved that the genius of an engineer lay not in steel, but in organization. His shipyards became the symbol of a new America, industrial, democratic, and fast. In 1942, he decided to go even further. He wanted to build a ship in just 4 days. The newspapers laughed. Admirals rolled their eyes. But Kaiser simply replied, "You'll see it. Not in plans, but in water." That's how the race that would change history began. Everything Kaiser had ever built, roads, dams, bridges, had only been a rehearsal for this moment. Now, he was building a fleet with nothing but faith in the impossible. "We're not fighting Germany with guns," he told his workers. "We're fighting them with deadlines." In January 1942, the Atlantic had become a graveyard. On the admiral's maps, every red dot meant a ship that would never return. German submarines, the U-boot, hunted right off the American coast, surfacing barely 10 miles from New York to sink ships loaded with steel, gasoline, and bread. The press called it the burning shore. The flames of oil tankers lit up the Carolina sky at night. Naval officers knew, if the flow of supplies wasn't restored, Britain would fall within 6 months. In the first 6 months of the war, America lost 4 times more tonnage than it could build. Each new ship took 230 days to construct and 5 minutes to sink. We were losing the war in the shipyards before we even met the enemy. Admiral Emery Land, 1942. The major shipyards, Bethlehem Steel, Newport News, Cramp, still worked with the methods of World War I, slow, expensive, obsessed with precision. Craftsmen took pride in quality, but war demanded quantity. By January 1942, Washington calculated that to replace losses, the U.S. needed 50 million tons of shipping in 3 years. No one believed it possible. President Roosevelt created the War Shipping Administration. Its head, Admiral Land, addressed America's industrialists. "Gentlemen, if we cannot move the supplies, we lose the war. Ships are bullets now." In the corridors, people whispered, America might lose not on the front, but in the dock. And then a name resurfaced, Henry J. Kaiser, the road king, who had already built dams and airports faster than anyone else. Now he offered to build a navy, with no shipyard, no engineers, and no experience. "If we can pour concrete in the desert, we can weld ships by the bay." Kaiser, January 1942. The new vessel was given a symbolic name, Liberty Ship. Its design was simple: 135 meters long, 11 knots, 10,000 tons of cargo, 44 crew. No luxury, only function. The secret wasn't in the design, but in how it was built. Kaiser proposed to construct them in parallel, across multiple yards. Traditional shipbuilders laughed, "You can't mass-produce ships like sausages." Kaiser calmly replied, "Then I'll build the factory for sausages." He reached an agreement with the government. Permission to open 3 experimental shipyards: Richmond, Portland, and Tacoma. There, the industrial miracle would begin. America lacked skilled workers. Most men were at the front. So the shipyards filled with women. Housewives, farmers' wives, students, migrants. They became the new workforce. Rosie the riveter, with a welding torch instead of a hammer. Kaiser opened training schools. In just 10 days, a newcomer became part of the mechanism. By 1942, his yards employed 170,000 people, more than half of them women. Every lost ship meant 2,000 soldiers, thousands of tons of fuel, thousands of lives. In the Atlantic, the U-boats hunted convoys. In America, Kaiser built a new front, the front of production. "We can't outfight them in the ocean," he said, "but we can outbuild them on land." His shipyards worked around the clock. 3 shifts, no weekends. Each hour, 15 railcars arrived in Richmond with parts and steel. Shipbuilding became a ritual, a rhythm of fire and iron. Kaiser called it his industrial symphony. By the spring of 1942, the Pentagon reported the fleet was still losing more ships than it built. Each new Liberty still required over 200 days. Admirals demanded more speed. Kaiser said simply, "Give me the steel and the people. I'll give you the ships." From that moment, the war entered a new phase, a battle of production rates. America began building speed itself. Every day at Kaiser's yards brought new innovations: continuous welding, modular sections, mobile work brigades. Our enemy is time itself. By the end of 1942, construction time had dropped to 45 days. Admirals were astonished. Kaiser wasn't satisfied. 45 days is still too long. Let's see how fast we can really go. He set a new goal: 4 days. Colleagues said it was impossible. Kaiser smiled. "That's why I like it." At that moment, America was still losing ships, but on the West Coast, a miracle was beginning. Thousands of hands, hundreds of cranes, millions of tons of steel, all united by a single purpose: to outrun time. "We were no longer building ships," Kaiser would later write. "We were building hope." ChatGPT's Ghazal, February 1942. In Richmond, California, fog mixed with the smoke of welding torches. Where a year earlier there had been nothing but an empty field, now hammers thundered, winches screamed, cranes groaned. Hundreds of workers moved like ants, hoisting steel sections, while arcs of blue fire lit the sky like lightning. The air smelled of metal, oil, and coffee. The shift began at 6 in the morning and never really ended. This was no longer just a shipyard. It was a new front. Kaiser understood. If you can't speed up a man, you must speed up the process. He turned shipbuilding into a chain of interchangeable operations. Every section of a ship became a part of a machine. No more master craftsmen. Now there were teams. No more genius. Now there was discipline. In war, genius is the ability to simplify. Henry J. Kaiser, 1942. Traditional ships were built from the keel up. Kaiser flipped the idea on its head. Every Liberty ship was made from 250 prefabricated sections, welded in advance. It was called modular assembly. Huge steel blocks, the hull, deck, stern, were created separately, then lifted by cranes and locked together like pieces of a giant puzzle. "We don't build ships, we assemble them." Kaiser's favorite phrase, the motto of his yards. Before the war, ships were riveted. Riveting was slow, deafening, dangerous. Kaiser replaced it with welding. It seemed insane. No one believed a ship that large could be welded like a car. But welding became the heart of the Liberty miracle. It made construction faster, stronger, and cheaper. Every minute now meant a life saved. While engineers argued, ships burned in the Atlantic. Kaiser reminded his workers, "Every spark you make here keeps a soldier alive out there." That became the slogan for tens of thousands. To maintain rhythm, Kaiser introduced synchronized shifts. Each crew knew exactly how many sections to finish per day. Large scoreboards showed progress and percentages. Some said the place looked like an orchestra, and Kaiser was the conductor. "Don't build faster, build smoother." Kaiser, 1943. His shipyards broke all boundaries. Men and women, black and white, immigrants and locals. Everyone worked side by side. Each team had a name: Blue Wolves, Iron Roses, Flame Number 3. Competition between teams made the yards feel alive, a living organism of steel. In Richmond, Kaiser even built a daycare center on site so women could work without leaving their children. It was the prototype for America's future social infrastructure. When Navy inspectors came to see the first Liberty ships, they were horrified. Too fast, too simple, too cheap. They believed these steel boxes wouldn't survive the ocean. Kaiser replied calmly, "Try them. If they break, we'll build 2 more." He knew reliability came not from elegance, but from numbers. In the spring of 1942, the first Liberty ship slid into the water. Crowds roared, whistles blared, women threw their hats into the air. On the hull was painted a name: SS Patrick Henry, after the patriot who said, "Give me liberty or give me death." The Liberty ship had become the living symbol of those words. A year later, Kaiser's yards were producing 3 ships a day. Each one cost half as much as before. They were slower, simpler, but they delivered. Of 2,700 Liberty ships built, 90% survived to the end of the war. We were turning out ships like newspapers. Richmond Shipyard Engineer, 1944. Kaiser's shipyards became laboratories of modern management. Every process was recorded, timed, and refined, laying the foundations for what would one day be called lean manufacturing. The newspapers wrote, "The Liberty ship is America itself, built by everyone for everyone." Radio broadcasters described the scene live. "Here, where sparks fall like snow, America is building its freedom." Kaiser demanded that every ship have its own rhythm of construction. One might take 30 days, another 20, another 10. He wanted to prove that speed itself was moral. If you can build one in 30 days, you can build one in 10. And he was going to prove it. At the end of 1942, the workers gathered in the yard. Kaiser stood before them and said, "They laughed when I said we'd build ships like cars. Now they count them like bullets." The crowd erupted in applause. No one yet knew that within months this man would truly build a ship. In just 4 days. November 1942. Henry Kaiser gathered his supervisors in Richmond. On the blackboard, he wrote 2 numbers in chalk: 230, 4, 230. The standard number of days to build a Liberty ship. 4, his new goal. "Gentlemen," he said, "we will build 1 ship in 4 days." There was laughter, murmurs. One engineer whispered, "He's gone mad." Kaiser looked at them calmly. "Madness," he said. is just speed other people can't see yet. The test subject was chosen, the SS Robert E. Peary, a standard Liberty ship that would be built not in months, but in minutes, its entire construction mapped out like choreography. 2,500 workers, 250 operations, 96 hours. Kaiser personally signed the schedule and said, "No excuses, not one." The yards turned into a war zone of motion. Cranes were tested like artillery. Hull sections were lined up like giant dominoes. Each module rolled in on rails every 30 minutes. No one slept. Workers joked, "Blink, and your section's already done." Dawn. Sirens wailed. The timer started. Zero was your zeros. Sparks filled the air as welders moved in perfect rhythm. Cranes lifted the first hull segment into place. Kaiser stood on the platform, watching hundreds of people move as one body. "This," he said, "is what war looks like when fought with hands." Shifts rotated without pause. Workers slept on crates under the hum of steel. Kaiser walked the dock with a coffee pot, serving men and women like a general serving soldiers. The press wrote, "Kaiser's shipyard never sleeps." By hour 36, the hull was complete. By hour 58, the deck was welded. By hour 70, the superstructure was in place. Kaiser didn't leave. He wrote on the board in chalk, "The enemy is fatigue." Historians would later call it the greatest industrial symphony of the 20th century. Every movement timed, every sound measured. Seconds for welds, minutes for cranes, workers per bolt. One observer said, "It was like watching an orchestra play Beethoven with cranes." December 9th, 1942, morning. The timer read 96 hours, 30 minutes. The ship stood complete. Crowds gathered. Flags rose. Bands played. On the bow, painted in white letters, SS Robert E. Peary. Kaiser stepped to the podium. "Gentlemen," he said, "the impossible takes 4 days." The ship slid into the water to the roar of sirens and applause. Newspapers called it the 4-day miracle. Within 24 hours, the photograph was on the front page of every paper in America. The Fire Sisters, the women welders, became national heroes. President Roosevelt sent a telegram. "You have built not only a ship, but a symbol of American will." In Congress, someone remarked, "If Kaiser could build tanks, the war would already be over." Traditional shipyards fumed, accusing him of theatrics. Kaiser replied, "If theater inspires work, I'll sell tickets." But facts were facts. Record confirmed. 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. The world had never seen anything like it. Project Peary became a laboratory of the future. Every process was filmed, timed, and analyzed. Each new Liberty ship was faster than the last. Kaiser had proved that wars are won by the speed of thought. Weeks later, the Robert E. Peary was crossing the Atlantic. She delivered fuel and machinery to England and came home 2 months later. On her hull, sailors chalked the words, "Built in 4 days, built to last." One worker would later write, "We didn't build a ship. We built faith that time itself can be beaten." That night, Kaiser sat alone on the pier. The lamp's reflection shimmered on the dark water. He turned to his assistant and said quietly, "Now, let's see what we can do in 1943, Richmond, California, once a quiet fishing town of 3 streets and a sleepy bay, had become the second fastest growing city in America. In just 2 years after Henry Kaiser arrived, its population exploded from 23,000 to over 100,000. Every house, every cafe, every school served one purpose: to build ships. Even the air hummed with metal. There were no ranks at the Richmond yards, but everyone felt like a soldier. Workers joked, "We fight Hitler with hammers." Each morning, 100,000 people poured into the docks. When the sirens wailed at 6 a.m., it sounded like a march to battle. Kaiser was the first to understand. To build a fleet, you need every pair of hands. When the men went to war, he opened the gates to women, and thus was born the legend of Rosie the Riveter. More than 30,000 women worked at the Richmond shipyards. They welded steel, drove cranes, drafted blueprints. For the first time in American history, women were not assistants. They were builders. One welder, Mary Houston, said, "I never saw the ocean before this job. Now I build what floats on it." Kaiser hired everyone willing to work. Black men from Louisiana, Mexican and Filipino immigrants, Polish and European refugees. They ate in the same cafeteria, worked in the same crews. It was a new face of America, a nation learning equality not through law, but through labor. On the walls of one yard was painted a slogan, "Every spark looks the same color." To let women work, Kaiser built the first 24-hour childcare centers in the country. While mothers welded steel, their children played nearby. He believed, you can't build ships if you destroy families. That same philosophy later became the foundation of Kaiser Permanente, one of America's first corporate healthcare systems. The yards ran 24 hours a day. Shifts lasted 10-12 hours. At midnight, trucks rolled through the docks, delivering hot coffee and sandwiches. Sometimes workers fell asleep on the floor. No one woke them. Above their heads, another weld was already glowing. Every worker had a number and a sector. Scoreboards hung on every wall. Sections completed, sections remaining, teams ahead of schedule. This method, later called the Kaiser time grid, became the prototype for modern visual management boards used in factories worldwide. At night, the welding torches could be seen for miles. Pilots flying over San Francisco said Richmond looked like a new city of light. Newspapers wrote, "Richmond glows brighter than Hollywood." Once, President Roosevelt asked Kaiser, "How do you keep them working 18 hours a day?" Kaiser smiled. "I don't. They keep themselves working. They believe every spark shortens the war." Every newcomer passed through the Kaiser Welding School. In just 7 days, someone who had never held a tool could become a certified welder. No long lectures, just practice, mentorship, and visual guides. Don't tell me what you can't do. Show me what you can learn. Henry J. Kaiser. By 1943, his shipyards were the largest in the world. Over 700,000 people had passed through the Kaiser system. Time magazine named him the organizer of victory. He said, "I don't build ships. I build people who can build ships." That became his credo. Kaiser understood that the greatest weapon of democracy wasn't its guns. It was its ability to come together. At the launch of another Liberty ship, a woman in overalls smashed a champagne bottle against the bow. Sirens screamed. The crowd roared. On the hull, in white letters, was written, "Built by America." Kaiser stood beside her and whispered, "No army could fight like this one." Late November 1942. At the Richmond shipyard, tension filled the air. Journalists lined the dock, NBC cameras stood on tripods, and radio crews hung cables directly on the steel beams. Everyone was waiting for the start of Project Peary. This was not just another ship. It was a test of an idea. Kaiser paced the platform in a grey overcoat, clutching his pocket watch. When the clock starts, history starts. December 6th, midnight. A siren wailed across the bay. Thousands of workers began to move at once. Cranes lifted the first bow section. Welding arcs burst into the darkness. Every crew worked to the tick of a stopwatch. Welders shouted through the roar of steel. Coordinators marked the time in chalk on the hull. 07:14, bow complete. The pace was so relentless that people forgot to eat. We didn't have breakfast or lunch. We had minutes. Kaiser had created a new system, the grid schedule A96. Everything was timed to the minute. Parts delivery, welding, painting, inspection. Even coffee breaks were on the chart. Every hour, the loudspeakers announced, 1 hour closer to liberty. By evening, the hull stretched 30 meters long. The second night, the dock glowed like a city. Women welders, the fire sisters, worked 20 meters above the ground, snow falling onto red, hot steel and vanishing in smoke. A local newspaper wrote, "The night sky of Richmond is brighter than day. 72 hours passed without rest. Mechanics slept in trucks. Doctors checked workers on the move. Kaiser gave no orders, only one phrase: keep the flame alive." By then, the ship was 80% complete. Steel modules arrived by narrow rail lines, each car numbered by minute. The rhythm itself kept people moving. December 10th, 4 a.m. The ship was finished. Cranes rumbled overhead, workers sang. Kaiser stood by the bow. His watch read 96 hours, 30 minutes. Let her go. The ship slid into the water. Sirens screamed. Applause. Fireworks. People wept. A reporter shouted into his microphone, "The Liberty ship Robert E. Peary has been completed in 4 days." Newspapers across the nation printed headlines, "The impossible done." A ship in 4 days. Kaiser beats time. The BBC broadcast the story to London. Churchill wrote in his diary, "America has forged the weapon of endurance." At traditional shipyards, reactions were mixed. Some admired, others fumed. An old foreman at Baltimore's Cramp shipyard said, "It's not shipbuilding, it's sorcery." But the results were real. Peary sailed to England, delivered her cargo, and returned safely. The 4-day project became a laboratory of progress. Every second of every operation had been recorded. The footage was sent to every shipyard in America. Within a month, the national average build time dropped to under 45 days. From a letter by welder Ethel Brown: "We worked until the world stopped being dark. I saw a ship rise where there was nothing. That's how faith looks, in steel and fire." That evening, Kaiser said, "We proved that America can outrun fear." And he was right. The ship born in 4 days became a symbol for generations, proof that time itself is not the enemy, if you learn how to master it. After the 4-day miracle, America was no longer the same. Newspapers wrote, "The man who makes ships appear faster than the enemy can sink them." But Henry Kaiser didn't celebrate. He knew the record mattered not for glory, but for method. The Peary proved that speed could be standardized. Now his goal wasn't one ship in 4 days, but a fleet in 4 months. By 1943, his shipyards were producing at a pace engineers once called impossible. 1 Liberty ship every 5 days, and on some lines, 2 a week. The cranes never stopped. It felt as if all of California breathed in rhythm with steel. From the War Production Board report, July 1943, Liberty ships produced 1/500 average build time, 42 days, Kaiser's record yards, 21 days, total launched tonnage, 16 million tons. Admiral Emery Land put it simply, "We are not fighting a war of bullets, we are fighting a war of tons." Every morning, loudspeakers announced, "Yesterday, 3 ships, 48,000 tons. Today, target 4. Workers cheered, clapped, and went to their stations. Kaiser understood that numbers could inspire, not just report. He turned statistics into music. Each yard had its own war scoreboard, a massive board showing results. At Richmond, it read, Build faster than Hitler can count. Those boards would later inspire what the world now calls KPI dashboards and performance tracking systems. But Kaiser's secret wasn't just in modular steel. It was in the economics of speed. If a ship cost $2 million and took 200 days to build, each lost day meant $10,000 gone. Cut that to 30 days, and the savings equaled a battle won. Every day saved is a bullet not fired. In 1943, Kaiser expanded. New yards in Portland, Vancouver, Tacoma, 7 giant docks linked by a single synchronized network. Parts for one ship could be built in another city and arrive just in time. It was an industrial front. Trucks, railways, factories, all functioning like a single organism. Every piece of steel had a route and a timestamp. Mechanics knew exactly which hour their section would arrive. Thus was born the principle of just in time, an idea Japan's Toyota would formalize 30 years later. By 1944, the United States was producing more ships than all other nations combined. In the Pacific, there were no longer shortages of vessels, only of ports to receive them. Liberty ships waited in line to unload. We were winning by outnumbering, not by outgunning, General Dwight D. Eisenhower would later say. When the radio announced a new production record, workers raised coffee mugs like toasts. Every number was personal victory. They believed, the more ships, the fewer coffins. Kaiser told them, we build to save lives, not to count profits. By mid-1944, he introduced daily improvement reports. Every mistake was logged immediately. Any worker, even a welder, could propose a solution. It was the birth of continuous improvement, the philosophy that industry still lives by. In 1 year, Kaiser built more ships than Germany did in the entire war. 2,010 Liberty ships, 6 million tons of fuel delivered, 75% of Allied logistics carried by his fleet. Every 17th ship on Earth bore his method. By the end of 1944, at a company assembly, Kaiser said, "Gentlemen, we are no longer building ships, we are building time." The phrase appeared on posters, in classrooms, and even in frontline newspapers. It became a symbol of an America that had learned to win through organization. And when the war finally neared its end, workers at Kaiser's yards would look at one another and say, "When the ships stop, we'll miss the noise." They knew they had been part of something greater, a battle won not by firepower, but by the speed of thought. When Henry Kaiser first proposed building ships like automobiles in 1941, the admirals and old engineers laughed. To them, he was an outsider, a road contractor, a dreamer without naval experience. In the corridors of Washington, they called him the cement man with crazy dreams. "You can't weld the ocean," said one Navy captain, "and you can't make sailors out of farmers." They were wrong on both counts. At the time, shipbuilding was considered almost a sacred craft. Each vessel took months to complete, overseen by academics, bureaucrats, and designers. Every bolt required a stamp of approval. Then Kaiser arrived and said, "We'll skip the papers. We'll build first, approve later." To the Navy, it sounded like heresy. He was breaking their sacred order, where control mattered more than results. When the first Liberty ships began to sail, the results were shocking. But the newspapers were cautious. The Navy didn't want to admit that a private contractor had achieved what the oldest shipyards in America could not. Even the success of the SS Patrick Henry was quietly downplayed. Kaiser was invited to conferences, but always scheduled last, labeled merely as a businessman, not an engineer. Then came the 4-day miracle. The headlines filled the nation. A ship in 4 days, America laughs at the impossible. The admirals were no longer laughing. They came to Richmond. They stood among cranes, sparks, and roaring sirens, and for the first time they saw that industry could move faster than the Navy. One naval engineer whispered, "Gentlemen, we are watching the future." To prove the quality of Kaiser's ships, the Navy ran a test. They loaded a Liberty ship to full capacity and sent it across the North Atlantic in the winter of 1943. Frozen seas, 50-foot waves, brutal storms. The ship made it. Not a single rivet lost. Admiral Emery Land reported to the President, "The cement man just built our Navy." After that test, the Navy signed contracts for 200 more ships. Kaiser's methods became the new standard. Every American shipyard adopted modular assembly and welding. Newspapers wrote, "What once was laughed at, now is law." Then, in the winter of 1943-44, several Liberty ships cracked in Arctic waters. The critics pounced again. Magazines ran headlines, "Kaiser's miracles crack in the cold." But investigation proved the cause. Not poor design, but low-grade steel under extreme temperatures. Kaiser personally ordered stronger alloys for the hulls. "A mistake is not a failure," he said. "It's a faster way to learn." By spring 1944, not one of his ships had been lost to structural failure. The Liberty ships were sailing across every ocean, from Murmansk to Saipan. They had become the workhorses of the war. "They may not be beautiful," said Admiral Ernest King, "but they get the job done." Scientific American published a landmark article, "Kaiser's Method, Engineering of the Future." It was the first to define the modern terms: modular assembly, sequential welding, industrial synchronization. What began as a foolish idea from a road builder was now being studied at MIT. In 1945, President Harry Truman awarded Henry Kaiser the Medal for Distinguished Service, the highest civilian honor in the United States. "You have done for shipbuilding what Edison did for light," said Truman. When a reporter asked, "Mr. Kaiser, how does it feel to be a hero who never killed a single enemy?" Kaiser smiled. "I didn't kill anyone. I just built things faster than they could destroy them." In the end, the skeptics bowed to reality. The world understood that the war of the future would be a war of organization, not fire. And Kaiser had proved that a man without a degree, without medals or rank, could change the course of history. As he later wrote in his memoirs, "In the end, the greatest weapon of democracy was the belief that the impossible can be scheduled." Summer 1945. The sirens of the Richmond shipyards fell silent. The war was over. Thousands of workers went home, leaving behind only wind and the empty hulls of ships. Kaiser stood at the pier where the Liberty ships once slid into the bay. Now the water was calm. He turned to his assistant and said, "It's strange, the sound of silence after so much purpose." For most, the war had ended. For Henry Kaiser, it was only beginning. He was determined to prove that the industrial miracle could serve peace, not war. After the war, America was left with factories, machines, and people, but no direction. Thousands of engineers and builders searched for meaning. Kaiser said, "We can build peace the same way we built ships, together, fast, and for everyone." He decided to apply his wartime methods to civilian life: housing, automobiles, medicine, metallurgy. His first project, Kaiser Communities, affordable housing for returning veterans. The homes were built with the same philosophy as the ships: modular sections, standardized parts, fast assembly. Thousands of families had roofs over their heads within weeks. Life magazine wrote, "The man who built ships now builds dreams." In 1947, Kaiser launched Kaiser Fraser Motors. Once again, he challenged giants, Ford and General Motors. His cars were built faster, cheaper, and safer. He pioneered reinforced bodies and passenger safety systems. A reporter once asked him, "Why did you go into automobiles?" Kaiser replied, "Because people deserve the same care as ships." During the war, he had learned a hard truth. When workers fell ill, production stopped. So he created his own medical service for them, Kaiser Permanente. After the war, he opened it to the public. It became the first large-scale health insurance system in the United States. "You can't build a healthy nation with sick people," he said. Today, Kaiser Permanente serves tens of millions of Americans. In 1946, he founded Kaiser Steel, the first fully integrated steel plant on the West Coast. Once again, he applied his system-thinking approach, production as a living network. The plant could make steel for cars, airplanes, and homes all at once. Newspapers wrote, "He builds industries the way others build walls." Kaiser financed projects for massive cargo aircraft, dreaming of linking continents by air. "If ships can cross oceans," he said, "then planes must cross the world." Though his aviation ventures never turned a profit, they helped shape the aerospace technologies of the 1950s. Kaiser believed that profit was never the goal, only the byproduct of good ideas. Industry should serve the people who make it possible. Under his companies, America saw its first: paid vacations, employee health insurance, women's advisory councils, and free education programs for workers. Fortune magazine called him America's civilian general. The New York Times wrote, "He proved that the line between humanitarian and industrialist can be erased." His management principles spread across universities. Hundreds of managers adopted the Kaiser system: visual planning, modular design, and worker motivation through purpose. These ideas became the foundation of modern management science. You organize hope, and results will follow. Henry J. Kaiser. In his later years, Kaiser often returned to the quiet shore where his first shipyards once stood. He would look out at the water where steel once turned into motion. "They were never mine," he said softly. "They belonged to everyone who believed." His name lived on hospitals, factories, automobiles, and in the steel hulls of the ships that helped save the world. Years later, when the crane arms had rusted and the waves slapped against the concrete piers, one idea still lingered in the air of those silent docks. People no longer built ships, but the rhythm remained. The teamwork, the shared belief that impossible was merely a matter of scheduling. None of it ever disappeared. America of the 1950s was blooming. Cars, skyscrapers, television, all of it rose from the same foundation that Henry Kaiser once applied to shipbuilding. His methods became part of the nation's bloodstream: division of labor, visual planning, modular assembly, motivation through measurable results. His phrase, "We're not building ships, we're building time," was quoted in Harvard Business School. 20 years after the war, engineers at Boeing and Lockheed used Kaiser's principles to produce jet aircraft. By the 1980s, Toyota publicly acknowledged that just-in-time manufacturing had its roots in Kaiser's American wartime system. He had laid the groundwork for what the world would later call lean manufacturing. "Speed isn't about running," he said. "It's about rhythm." By the 1960s, his medical network, Kaiser Permanente, had become the largest healthcare system in the United States. It united doctors, hospitals, and insurance into a single mechanism, just as his shipyards once united the sections of a vessel. It was the same philosophy continued. Everything should function like a living organism. In the 1950s and 1960s, documentaries about the Liberty ships were shown in schools and universities. Young engineers studied the black and white footage of Kaiser's factories where every move was timed to the second. His story became more than history. It became the morale of an era, a faith in organization, a belief in shared purpose. Kaiser often said, "Machines don't make miracles, people do." He understood that behind every record stood hands, behind every chart, tired eyes. He never called himself a hero. To him, heroism lived in the people who showed up at 6 in the morning and went home only when the ship was already at sea. When Henry J. Kaiser died in 1967, thousands of workers, engineers, and doctors stood in silence at his funeral. Someone whispered, "He built us, not just ships." Today, his name lives on, in hospitals, steel plants, university labs, and in the California valleys where he once poured concrete. Every modern container ship, every assembly line, every project management system carries traces of his thinking. He left no formulas, only a conviction. Engineering is the art of defeating chaos. You can't control the storm, but you can schedule the ship. Henry J. Kaiser. Decades later, his principles are studied by managers, doctors, architects, and programmers alike. Whenever a company seeks to build faster, whenever a team searches for perfect synchronization, they follow, knowingly or not, the footsteps of a man who once simply wanted to build a ship faster. Kaiser's ships have mostly vanished from the seas, but their silhouettes remain, in museums, in photographs, and in the hearts of those who still believe in progress. The story of Henry J. Kaiser is the story of how belief in the possible can change the world when joined with human hands. "The war ended," he once wrote in his diary, "but the idea never did."